Welcome to the fourth of these introductory videos to the A-Level English Language AQA specification language levels. I think I'm going to edit that. Okay. So welcome to the fourth of these introductory videos to the A-Level English Language AQA specification language levels. Today I'm going to look at Grammar and Morphology. But before we do so, let's just have a quick reminder of what the language levels are. This is a framework that we use in English language to investigate all the different areas. And when we're writing about language, it provides a useful checklist for are we covering the right things. So in the first video, we looked at phonology and prosodics. In the second video, we looked at the different types of words, or lexis, where words come from. In the third video, we looked at semantics and how words make meanings and how this is sometimes context-bound. And today, obviously, we're going to look at grammar and morphology, how words are built into phrases, clauses, sentences. In the next video, we'll have a look at pragmatics, which is language in use in situations, and we'll get to that in due course. And the final one will be on graphology. So, grammar and morphology then. What are we dealing with today? Really, language is a system or a collection of pieces. And what we're looking at in grammar and morphology is how these pieces join together and form larger parts. If you think for a minute of your house, it's built of individual bricks, which make walls, a larger structure, which then make rooms, which again are a larger structure, and put all those rooms together and you have your house. And to take that idea further, just as you can't usually have a door in the floor, except in exceptional circumstances like a trapdoor, for example, there are certain ways that we can construct sentences that are logical and systematic, and some just would be nonsensical or just wouldn't work in the English language, at least. Those structures may work in other languages, and we'll deal with that when we look at World Englishes. So there's quite a lot of key terms within this particular one. So let's start with those. We've got morphology, syntax, descriptivism, prescriptivism, roots, suffixes, prefixes, affixes, inflectional function and derivational function. This has got to do with morphology. And don't worry if you don't know what these mean. Obviously, throughout the video, we'll deal with those and hopefully explain them. Noun phrases. Okay, take a deep breath. Verb phrases. Head words. Pre-modifiers. Qualifiers. Post-modifiers. Primary auxiliary verbs. Modal auxiliary verbs. Clauses. Coordination, subordination, and adverbial clauses. And we're not done yet. Noun clauses, active voice, passive voice, declaratives, interrogatives, imperatives, exclamatory. Okay, that's quite a lot. Take your time over them, pause things. You don't have to learn them all at once. This language will become familiar to you as the course progresses. So let's look at the building blocks of grammar then. Let's take it in size order. So the smallest unit we've got is the morpheme. Morphemes form words. Sometimes we put morphemes together to form a word. Sometimes the word itself is a morpheme. Obviously, we put words together to form phrases. This is the next kind of size unit within the sentence. We then put phrases together to form clauses or meaningful units. And clauses then form sentences. Now we can just have one clause forming sentence, or we can have multiple clauses, and we'll deal with that in a few slides. And then finally, we put all these sentences together and we form a text, whether that be a diary, a newspaper article, a record review, whatever it is. And quite often you hear grammar and syntax used kind of within the same sentence or in the same kind of framework of discussion. And syntax then really is the order in which the phrases are constructed or the clauses are constructed, or the order within the sentence. And English differs from other languages. You know, each language has its own kind of syntax. And when we get to World Englishes, again, that's something we'll explore in more detail, and possibly in child language, where children don't necessarily construct clauses in the same way that adults do. And again, that's something we'll discuss later. So there are two approaches that we can take then to language generally, but certainly this crops up a lot in the investigation of grammar and syntax. We have two images here, one of a microscope, one of a prescription. And the microscope is kind of hinting at the descriptive approach to language. It's a scientific approach, it's an objective approach, and we're analysing how the language is being used, and in the instance of grammar and syntax, how it's being joined, how it's being constructive. We're not making any judgments about it, we are just describing how the sentence in front of us or how the text in front of us is put together. A prescriptive approach is a little bit more subjective. Takes the approach that there are specific rules that have to be followed, and kind of underlying that is this notion of correctness, and anything that doesn't fit in with the rules or what's perceived as being correct is seen as in some way deficit to the standard. And we'll see that, you know, we don't want to really take that approach in A-level language or linguistics. We want to be more on the descriptive side. So let's start with the smallest unit then, morphology, and this is how individual words are actually formed. So if we take a word like apples, it's made up of two parts, apple and the S to make it apples. Now, apple is what we call the base or the root word. And another way of describing this is a free or unbound morpheme. It can exist independently. It doesn't need anything else for it to make sense. Now, the S, what does that do? It's an additional part, and usually this does something to the word. It performs some kind of function on the word. And in this case, obviously, it's making the object, the apple, plural, but it can't exist on its own. We don't walk around going s. So because its meaning, its function is bound up with the root word, we call it a bound morpheme. And bound morphemes may be put sometimes at the start of words, sometimes at the end of words, and we call this process affixation or affixes. So they can go at the start of the word, in which case we call it a prefix. And again, this should be familiar from probably Key Stage 2 English, certainly Key Stage 3 and 4. And then we can place them at the end of the words, and in which case it's called a suffix. Sometimes the affixation or the affix has an inflectional function, in which case pluralizing nouns, creating verb tenses. It doesn't really change the meaning of the word. The other form of morphology is the derivational function, where we add a suffix or a prefix, or sometimes in some languages what's called a circumflex, at the end, beginning, or in the center of the word, and it creates a brand new word. So a point means to appoint, to put something in place. But if we put the word dis in front of a point, it creates a brand new word. It means to be let down. So that's what we call derivational morphology. And you can find plenty of examples of this. So now we've got the morpheme, and really that's dealing with words as well. Let's look at phrases, and these are slightly larger structures. So the two ones that we're interested in are the noun phrase and the verb phrase. So let's build up a noun phrase to begin with. So there's going to be a noun around which the whole phrase is built, and we call this the head word. So in this case, it's going to be cat. That's going to be our head word. So we're then going to build on that. We're going to use a determiner. So the cat, still a noun phrase. Now we're adding a modifier, something that does something to the cat. So it gives us the quality of it. So we have the fat cat. So now we've got the addition of a modifier. So we've got determiner, modifier, and then the head word. Now we're adding what's called a qualifier. So the fat cat in the garden. So we've got the determiner, the modifier, fat, the head word, cat, and the qualifier in the garden. Notice that the word cat is always there. It's always the head word. It's the noun around which the whole phrase is being built. So if we said the fat in the garden, it would make no sense. If we said, it would just make no sense. So the word fat changes the noun, and the phrase, or a little bit in the garden, the qualifier gives a bit more detail. So let's have a look at verb phrases then, having dealt with noun phrases. So let's take the word dig. That's going to be our main verb or our head word within this phrase. And if you remember from the presentation on Lexis, this is what we'd call a dynamic or a material verb. It's an action. It's something that you can see being done. Now we're going to add something else to the verb phrase. We're going to add what's called a primary auxiliary verb. And this includes the verbs to be, to do, to have. And often this shows the tense, the time at which it was taking place. So I was digging. And again, this is an example of inflectional morphology. It's not actually doing anything different to the verb. We're just kind of giving detail. So head word is still dig, or a form, one of the verb forms of dig, and that's still our head word. Now we're adding what's called a modal auxiliary verb, which tends to show the degree of commitment or obligation we have to doing the action. So I should have dug. We've got I, a pronoun. Should is now the modal auxiliary verb. Have is a form of primary auxiliary verb, and dug, okay, is still the head word or the main verb. We can have negative forms, obviously. We could have had I should not have dug. So if we put it with the noun phrase we had from the previous slide, we can get something like the fat cat in the garden should not have dug up the flowers, consisting of a noun phrase there, the fat cat in the garden, and the verb phrase should not have dug up the flowers. And kind of sidebar on modal auxiliaries for a minute. As I said previously, they show a degree of commitment or obligation. So if we look at these four, I should do my independent learning, I will do my independent learning, I might do my independent learning, and I must do my independent learning. We could place those along the kind of sloping edge of the triangle. There's probably a mathematical word for it, but that'll do for now. Which has the most force, the most degree of obligation? I would argue that I must suggests a very strong degree of obligation, whereas I might kind of suggest less of a commitment or obligation to do it. And you could place should and will, somewhere along that slope. If you want a bit of a stretch and challenge, and you can watch later videos when they're available, which will cover this, but you could always look up what do we mean by epistemic, deontic, and bulimaic modalities when we're dealing with modal auxiliary verbs. This is kind of obviously taking your knowledge of language to a higher level, and your ability to talk about language becomes more detailed and precise, and obviously that will be credited. So let's build up clauses now, and these tend to be centered around a verb phrase. And a verb phrase will usually consist of a subject, an object, a complement, and sometimes an adverbial, not always. So the subject then is usually a noun phrase, like we had previously, the cat. It's the key focus of the clause, it's what it's about. Sometimes it has something being done to it, so the subject of the sentence has something being done to it. We call that a relational verb process, or it's the one doing something, in which case we call it the agent of a material verb process. And then we have an object which identifies what it is that's being acted on by the verb, what's receiving the action. And then we have a complement, which is usually a noun phrase, and I'm aware I've made an error there, forgive that. Usually a noun phrase, and it's an attribute of the subject in the relational verb process, so it's something about it. And then the adverbial usually tells us, sometimes it's an adverb, sometimes it's prepositional phrase, and it identifies time, place, or manner in which the action is being done. So let's have a look at this and build one up then. So the cat sat. So here we've got the subject, the noun phrase, the cat, and then sat, and it's your verb. So the cat sat in the garden. Now we've got the subject, the cat, the verb, sat, and now we've got an object, something that's actually receiving the action. So the garden is receiving the action of the cat sitting. Here's an example of a subject-verb complement structure. So we've got the cat as the subject was, and it's that's the verb, is the being. So the cat is being something. So what is it being? What's the attribute of it? And that is tired. Sometimes we might have two objects, and we call this direct and indirect object. So in this sentence, I gave my cat some food. What is it that is receiving the giving? What is it that's being given? What's the receipt of the giving? Well, the cat is the thing that's receiving the food. And in this case, we've got an adverbial. So I put the cat in the cat carrier. We've got the subject, I, the verb, put, object, cat. Cat is the object receiving the putting. And then we've got the adverbial, which is clarifying the place there. So it's in the cat carrier. So when you study language acquisition or language change later on in the course, or in some instances language varieties, you'll notice the clause structures and phrase structures may not be quite the same way or quite the same form that we've outlined in the previous slides. And that's one of the things that we discuss in that descriptive way rather than prescriptive. We'll be talking about, well, why is it that language, when that person is using English, who's not a native user, why do they put these parts of the sentence in that order? What's going on there? And clauses, then we can build up sentences from multiclosable kind of structures. So words form phrases. We've seen with the noun phrase and verb phrase. Then phrases form clauses. And then we add more clauses and we can produce a multi-clause sentence. We can do this in one of two ways. One way is coordination. And in coordination, both clauses are of equal value. They just join together. And our main coordinating kind of words are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And one of the ways of remembering this is by the acronym FANBOYS. And in a coordinated clause, each bit of each side can stand alone. They have equal value. So I've given the image there of scales there to show that they are balanced. They have equal value. So this morning will be rainy. You could say that. In the evening, the skies will be cloudless. You could say that independently. And they will both make sense. Put the word and in the middle, and we've joined those together. We've linked the idea the morning will be rainy, and in the evening the skies will be cloudless. We're making a comparison there, but each of those have equal value. So you'll be familiar, that's what we call a simple compound sentence. We're just adding a coordinator. Now with subordination, again, let's just deal with two clauses to keep things simple. Clause A has more weight. It carries the greater meaning. It's the one that is the important clause. And clause B is less, it's not as important. It becomes more complex, hence complex sentences. So the one clause can stand on its own and the other cannot stand independently. It can't hold the weight or the meaning of the sentence. And often the second clause is an adverbial clause. It's telling us a little bit more detail, time, place, or manner. So we have the main clause, and within that is a subordinate clause. So if we've got a sentence, we've got subordinate clause and main clause, and they could be in either order, doesn't matter. And we've got a number of subordinating conjunctions, and I've borrowed this one because I couldn't be bothered to write it out myself. These are some of the main subordinating conjunctions, and quite often you'll hear these referred to as signposting words, and you use these in quite a lot of essays. And there are many, many more, but here's some of the main ones. And there's the website if you want to go and have a look at that. So I didn't go outside, although I really wanted to. I didn't go outside can stand independently. We don't need anything else for that. If you walked up to somebody and said, I really wanted to, where's the context for that? What exactly are you talking about? You don't have the subject. You don't have any context for it. That bit cannot stand alone. It's subordinate. It needs that first bit. It needs that I didn't go outside to make it make sense. So as I said, we could put the subordinate clause first, although I really wanted to, I didn't go outside. We still need that I didn't go outside for it to make sense, whether it comes at the end of the sentence or whether it's fronted. Let's move then to the active and passive voice. I suppose the question with active and passive is, who's taking responsibility for the action? So we're talking about agency, and we can downplay or emphasize agency depending on whether we use the active or passive voice. So if we've got a newspaper headline, government negligently fails to stockpile necessary equipment. The people responsible, the agent, is in the subject position. There's emphasis on it there, the government. We know who it is who's responsible. And it's reinforced by the use of the verb phrase, the adjective and the verb. Negligently fails. We know the government have negligently failed. In this example, which is in passive, necessary equipment remains stuck in distribution centres. The thing that's being affected by the verb, the thing that's being stuck, is placed in the subject position. The necessary equipment is stuck, and it avoids answering the question about who is responsible, or it doesn't attribute blame. So quite often, if you listen to politicians' answers, quite often they will talk in the passive voice about actions that have been taken. They won't say, we made mistakes. They will say, mistakes have been made. So quick little bit then on sentence functions. There are four main sentence functions, or clause functions. And we can make statements or declarations, like the weather is warm for this time of year. Some birds build nests. That's a simple statement or declaration of fact. We can ask questions, and we call those interrogatives. So we have declaratives, interrogatives. Which are the months in spring? What birds don't build nests? So we call that the interrogative sentence function. We can give orders or commands to people, and we call that an imperative. It's something that the person thinks must be done. So put on your coat, go outside. It's a command, it's an order, it's an imperative. Close that window, please. Slightly politer form, but it's still a command. And we can make exclamations. What a pointless exercise. Geez, I'm bored out of my brain. So there's usually an emotive function. Okay, I hope that's been useful.